Welcome back to Fossil Ridge Games. Today's video is going to be for the game My Father's Work. I'm going to teach you about the different types of workers in the game. I'm also going to teach you about the different experiments in the game and how to play all the workers, where to place all the workers on the game board, and how to play out all of these experiments. All of these different tokens and all of these different meeples can go to different places actually on the board. So they're going to sit in what's called the quarters, which is the top portion of the player board. I'm just going to go ahead and zoom out and then zoom back in so you can see for context. And then if you notice at the bottom of the quarters, there is sort of a guide on where all of these people can go. So the first one that we're going to look at is the self sort of meeple, and this one's going to have a hexagonal base. This is going to represent the main person in the lineage. Since this is a generational game, this character is going to represent basically the progeny of the previous experimenter, and this is going to be the main person in charge of the estate. This meeple is going to be extremely versatile, and you can send the self meeple to both estate locations. So I'll just go ahead and pop out, and there are several places in the estate that this worker can be placed. In addition to that, the self meeple can be placed on different town spaces to utilize those spaces correctly. Now, when you use this meeple in the town, it's going to afford you several bonuses. So I'm going to go ahead and just place the camera down here as well and kind of zoom in. So as an example, if you as the self sort of hexagonal meeple go into the town, you can gain some definite benefits from doing that. And you can perform the action, what they call twice. So as an example, if this meeple was placed on the farmer's market, they could perform the action twice. So normally you would draw one animal, but since you're using the self token, you would perform that action twice and you would get two of these as well. Something else that can happen in the game is that, let's say there's another meeple already on the market itself. If you were to take your piece and put it down onto the map, as per the rules, you would have to spend sort of $1 to go to a location that there's a meeple already at, and that's going to be another player. So it's not going to count. Let's say if you have already one of your purple meeples out and then you place your meeple down, it has to be an opposing player's meeple. So in this case, my worker is going to move on to the location, and most of the time I would have to pay the sort of $1 penalty. But since it's the self or the hexagonal piece, I don't actually have to pay the dollar penalty to go to one of those locations. So kind of to sum it up, the self meeples that are present in the game are extremely versatile, and something else that they can do is they can go into any of the estate locations as well. And you can suffer some penalties also if they record knowledge. And you can also suffer penalties if some of your workers are performing experiments. And this kind of represents that they're horrified or they're creeped out with what you're doing in the estate, and they just simply leave. They're like, I'm not doing this anymore. I don't want to be any part of these strange and creepy experiments. So kind of what you can see is there are some penalty markers, and I'll go ahead and zoom in really quickly on that. Hopefully it stabilizes. So you can see that there are some X's placed through the circular meeple icon. And then also in this corner of the board for record knowledge, this is also the case right here. So if you ever send any of your circular meeples into that location, you're going to lose them. So what are the circular meeples? These are going to represent servants in the game. And the game has up to 2 different servants. In addition to that, anything with a circular base can also be your spouse, but notice your spouse has these weird protrusions and knobs on the side. That means that both the servant and your spouse can go to any location with a circle on it. So as we look right here in the guide, this indicates that they can go to the town. So either your spouse or your servants can go into the town And that's just going to be a normal placement, and you get the resource indicated. But we have two other locations down here in the estate that if you send them, you're going to kind of suffer a penalty. So one of them is going to be the laboratory, and notice that you're going to need two of them. So if you take, let's say, one servant, and then you take a second servant and you place them into the laboratory, they can perform an experiment, which is great, and you're going to gain victory points. But what's going to happen is they're going to be removed at one of the end steps on the turn sequence. So specifically, when you go to the end of each round, these workers are going to disappear. And what's kind of interesting about it is that, you know, if you do start losing some of your workers, in some cases you can buy them back, in other cases you can't. So here's another example. When you record knowledge, and let's say it's your spouse this time, you place them into the record knowledge section of your estate. Once you hit the end of the round, they're going to leave you, but the spouse is going to leave you for good. You're not going to be able to get married again. At least I haven't seen it in the game. So this is going to be gone for that entire generation. So since this is a generational game, you have to kind of make a decision. Hey, do I want to lose this worker permanently? Next up, we're going to talk about the last type, which is going to be the caretaker. And each time you start a generation, you're going to start with one of the caretakers. The caretakers have a square base, and really where they excel is kind of staying in the estate and performing actions within the estate. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on the quarters box, and notice that there is an estate icon that's square. And what that means is that your caretaker is really going to be poised at going to these three different locations. Typically what I use the caretaker for is to perform experiments, but you can do other things like estate affairs, or they can record knowledge as well. So kind of the name of the game is looking at the different workers that you have, looking at these different meeples, and choosing where you send them and what resources you're going to gain and what experiments you are going to execute. A cornerstone component of my father's work is understanding the concept of experiments. Experiments are broken down into A, B, C, and then your masterwork style experiments. The A experiments are the easiest, and your masterwork are going to be the most difficult. So let's go ahead and break down kind of what you expect to see when you are playing this game and you are trying to finish one of these experiments. I went ahead and flipped over an A-level experiment, and in the upper left corner, this is going to show you what you need to actually complete this experiment. This A-level experiment is super easy to do, so you just simply need an animal to finish this experiment. Then on the bottom end of the card, it gives you a completed A experiment, and then it also gives you two of these green knowledge cubes, which are biology cubes. Now these cubes are going to be spent on higher level experiments, and then finally we have a victory point that you get for clearing it. Now what we're going to do is flip over a B-level experiment, and I'll kind of show you what we're looking at. Now when we flip over a B-level experiment, notice that there is a prerequisite that an A has been completed. So on our previous card at the bottom left-hand corner, we note that we have an A-level experiment completed. So in order to do a B, you have to have one A completed. And in this case, we're going to need a couple chemicals, and then we're also going to need a chemistry knowledge token also on the card. So this one's going to be more complex to complete. Then at the bottom of this, we notice that we're going to gain a chemical when we complete it. And then also, in addition to that, we're going to gain creepy. So creepy is something that has deleterious effects. It's at the top end of the board. So when you get enough creepy, bad things happen to you, and I'll go over that a little bit later. Next up, we have 5 victory points listed on this card. So now what I'm going to do is just shift these cards over here. I'm going to flip a C-level experiment over. And notice that in order to do a C-level experiment, 1A has to be completed and 2 B-level experiments have to be completed. This one's going to need a corpse, a potion, and significantly more knowledge. In this case, the gray is going to be occult. And then finally, at the beginning of this, or at the bottom of this, we notice that we're going to get a C-level experiment. And then also we're going to gain significantly more amounts of victory points. So it's going to start at 10, and then depending on which generation you complete this, it's going to give you a bonus. So if you complete this in the first generation, you're going to get plus 8 victory points for 18. If you complete this on the second generation, you're going to get an extra 4 victory points, which is going to leave you at 14. If you do this on the third generation, you're going to get simply 10 victory points. So as you can see, there's this overall progression where you're going to start with A level, then go to B level, and then go to C level. And then finally, I'm going to round it out with one of the masterwork experiments. And in this case, I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer. Hopefully it actually zooms correctly. Actually, I'm not, because it doesn't want to pick it up. Anyways, we have A, 2 Bs, and 3 Cs that need to be completed before you can do your masterwork experiment. In this case, we have even more resources that are needed and knowledge to complete this. And then at the bottom end, we're going to gain insanity points and creepy, and then finally 19 victory points. So the overall point of this game is to gain victory points. So you're going to amass a massive amount of victory points if you complete your masterwork experiment. But in order to do so, you have to start small and go from A to B to C level experiments. We're going to go ahead and talk about estate upgrades and sort of the impact to the game as well. This is a mechanic, in my opinion, that's very impactful, but it's only impactful if you purchase the estate upgrades at the beginning of the game. So kind of what I'm showing you is the bottom of the estate, and then this tracker goes up around the corner. And most of the estate upgrades are going to have some sort of triggered effect, or they have a permanent effect that impacts the game itself. So as an example, like the servants' quarters, if you have that once per generation, you can get a free worker, a free servant to come to your estate. And then some of this other stuff is that, like, you know, this one is when you purchase it, you're going to gain $1, and then at the start of each generation, you're going to gain 2. Then a lot of these are going to give you a particular type of resource. The one on the right is absolutely amazing. It's going to give you a stored C experiment, and that's going to be all the time. So that's going to make it extremely easy for you to complete your masterwork experiment. Then some of these other ones are going to help you with experiments, like as an example, the dungeon. All experiments require 1 less body. And obviously when you purchase this thing, you're going to become creepy and insane at the same time. And then this next one is formaldehyde. You may hold 1 additional completed experiment between generations. Well, we've kind of learned about completed experiments. That's really important. And that can also help you score a lot of victory points later on, because you can put together level C and your masterwork a lot easier. Zoo of Curiosities, you may hold 3 experiments in your hand between generations. That's fantastic. That gives you a lot of control over what you're going to do in the next generation. And then finally, Iron Vault, anytime you conduct estate affairs, you can regain 1 sanity. So a lot of these estate upgrades don't kind of count those out. And then something else that happens at the end of each generation, you're going to lose all your money. So at the start of each round, you're going to gain $3, and thus you can use that to kind of do worker placement, or you can buy estate upgrades. I would recommend at least once per generation, at a very bare minimum, purchase 1 estate upgrade. The earlier you purchase these, the more benefit you can get out of them, because a lot of stuff is going to trigger endlessly over the course of the game, or it's going to trigger once per generation. So don't wait until like the last sort of generation to buy upgrades. In addition to that, when you're doing final scoring, and this isn't hugely impactful to the course of the game, but I have seen a couple games where the person with the most estate upgrades actually won, because they were only like 2 or 3 victory points behind, and then they had a significant number of estate upgrades. At the end of the game, you get 1 victory point for each estate upgrade that you have as well. Something else that should be mentioned is that when you hit a lot of the level 3 and tier 3 level style experiments, you get a lot of victory points for those. So you can kind of amass and surge ahead with victory points by kind of transitioning your money into that in the late game. Here's a quick example of some tier 3 estate upgrades. First one's going to be gain 3 victory points. The next one is 6 victory points, 4 victory points, 8 victory points. So as you can kind of see, you're really cashing in your money in the last generation to really surge ahead when it comes to victory points. So be very mindful as you hit the end of the game. You can spend your money to give yourself a decent number of victory points. Some of these other ones are really nice because, like here's the personal library again. You can get a free sea-level experiment. That'll help you in the last generation complete and close out your masterwork experiment. And then also too, like this one right here says gain 3 knowledge of your choice. That also kind of falls into the same category. You can use that knowledge to complete like a level C experiment, or you can use that to close out your masterwork. And what's nice about this one, it's 3 knowledge of your choice. So that could be like a mixture. It doesn't say they all have to be from the same type and category. So don't rule out these level 3, tier 3 estate upgrades when you hit toward the end of the game. They can help you close out your masterwork and give you extra victory points. I want to thank you today for watching this video. Now that you have both videos 1 and 2 under your belt and you understand the basic game mechanics, video number 3 in this series is going to focus on different strategies that our game group really favored as we play this game. We played this game numerous times. There's a lot of engagement from the players overall. And so I'm going to share with you both my insights and their insights on the best strategies and tips that we can give you so you can enter this gaming world and be successful and have a good time with your friends.